That's why Obama isn't allowed to eat jelly beans. Thank you. We have a great show for you tonight. The world record holder for the most bricks smashed with his head is here. Quan Big Bruce. Our musical guest, Pimples on My Dimples, will perform a hit from the new album, Lined It in the Face. But first, here to talk about his memoir, Tokyo Vice, it is a great pleasure to introduce Jake Adelstein.
Hi, hello there. Thank you very much. It is a great pleasure to be here on this show with you today, Bicycle Murray.
So, Jake, I've read your book. A few people in my audience might have read your book too. There's like 6 people who watch the show who can actually read, but I think everybody would love to hear it from you. So, why don't you give us a little summary about it?
This is hard to do without spoiling the ending here. If you want a hint, I don't die. Tokyo Vice is a memoir I wrote about getting accepted into the Yomori Press Club. It's one of the biggest reporting and journalism opportunities in Japan. And I ended up as a reporter for the Japanese police beat.
What a coincidence. The Japanese police beat me too. But I probably deserved it.
Well, that was funny. My memoir, it basically gives people an inside look at what Japan's crime rate really is and what really goes down there in the underworld.
The underworld? Did the criminals carry pitchforks or something? Was there a 3-headed dog?
No 3-headed dogs, but it's pretty horrific, the Japanese police beat. Even the cops are scared of some of those criminals, like the Yakuza.
Salute!
Trust me, man, there was nothing funny about these guys. Every time I had a run-in with anyone from the Yakuza gang, I almost wet my pants.
Hey, careful. That's a new chair. So the Yakuza. I remember that scene in the book. What was it like to talk to a Yakuza in person like that?
Well, luckily, when one of the Yakuza contacted me, he called me on the phone asking to speak with me first before I actually had to go talk to him. So, I didn't pee my pants when I saw him. But I was really scared. It was weird, you know? This guy had killed like several people and was one of the heads of the Yakuza gang. And yet, he called me up asking for help. And then, when I actually got to talk to him, he was really polite. He even asked me if I wanted coffee or tea.
So, was he like, would you like honey or homicide with that?
Actually, normally in Japan, they just assume you like tea. And I don't like tea. I like coffee. So, it was very polite of him to offer.
So, was that the only experience you had with the Yakuza?
Yakuza? And, no. I covered them all the time. If you're on a police beat in Japan, the Yakuza come up every day because of their drug and crime rate. I was on this one Yakuza case for like 3 weeks.
So, can you tell us about the case, or would you then have to kill us?
It was easily one of the more exciting cases I had to cover. It could have come out of a bad 80s cop show. It had creepy dog breeders by Yakuza and missing persons.
Hey, that sounds like my prom.
Well, the situation was a dog breeder named Jen Seki something, I think, Jen Sakine, if I remember correctly, was under suspicion of being a serial killer.
So, Cheerios, Fruit Loops, Cocoa Puffs.
Unfortunately, people. And what certainly didn't help his reputation in this case was that he also happened to be an ex-Yakuza. And in the last 10 years, when I had the case, several people were reported missing and all associated with him. The police had been trying to prove him guilty for ages, but came out dry every time. Luckily, with this case, we were good to go, and all signs pointed to him. The man who was reported missing this time had beef with him and was last seen in his pet shop. At the end of the case, it was not only Jen Sakine who was reported guilty, but his wife, too.
Well, that really is a bad 80s cop show.
But that wasn't even the scariest part about that guy. Although, let me tell you, that was still wet your pants scary.
What was the scariest part, then?
The type of pet store he ran. They called him Kennel. And he didn't do normal business. He bred. He bred monsters. Like, I'm talking dogs with big teeth and, hybrid tigers. Crazy stuff like that.
3 heads?
Not as far as you know. But anyway, there's this cop source I went to for that particular investigation. I'm not allowed to say his name because he swore me to secrecy for life, but I can spell what he told me.
Dear Lord, you're not peeing now, are you?
Don't worry, your chair is safe. So anyway, the cop guy told me Kennel bred them for Yakuza specifically. The one example he gave me was when Kennel and the customer had like some beef with each other or something. See, they were arguing over pricing for a dog and it wasn't really going anywhere. Alright, so try to visualize this situation here, and then imagine how I felt having to interview the guy. So the image is the customer refuses to pay Kennel the price he's asking for. So Kennel cuts off the dog's ear and tells the customer, now he's worth the price you're asking for. I mean, who the hell wants to search for a guy like that? When the cop told me that, I really had to check if I crapped my pants that time.
Wow, your job is rough on laundry. How'd you get a job like that?
Well, I mean, just like any other job, I had to leave an impression. It's just, this time the impression I left was, basically, phenomenating. I mean, truthfully, I don't even know how I got the job, but that's not the point of this. Anyway, see, Japan is very structured. They have all of these unnamed rules.
So does my mother.
Well, trust me, these rules are even worse. Like, they classify their own suits.
So what, hearts, clubs, like that?
No, bicycle. The suits they wear. And so, me, being American and classifying only my food groups, I was unaware of this. So I bought this great new suit to look presentable, because the heat had turned my others into hanging mold. This new suit was quite slick. The only fungus touching it was me. So anyway, I wore this suit, all hyped up for my new interview at the Yamori Press Club. But then I walked in, there were like 5 guys interviewing me, and every single one of them had this sad look on their face. And one of them says to me all serious, "Who died?" I look at them all confused because I was like, that's an odd interview question. Turns out, the suit I chose is classified under funerals. Luckily, no one took it personally, and I left a great impression. So there I was, with a fantastic job.
So, what other rules do the Japanese have?
Well, they have all these guidelines and manuals on how to do everything, even arguing. One example I remember, and I don't know if you know this, but Koreans hate the Japanese, and the Japanese hate Koreans.
You mean the North Koreans too?
I don't count the North Koreans. They hate everybody. And this one manual, which was the top of the bestseller list for a while, was called How to Argue with a Korean. And it gave very specific details on how to argue with people from Korea. This book wasn't even a satire. It was meant to be taken seriously. And it was. There was another one I remember too, called The Perfect Manual of Suicide. Also not a satire. These things just amazed me in Japan.
I actually remember something like that in your memoir. It almost made me pee. Luckily, my mother does my laundry.
Yeah, well, that was also a top seller. The Japanese take dying very seriously, and I actually had to report a case where a teenage boy committed suicide. See, he was found dead in his room, but his body was totally unharmed. Nothing was hurt or seemed damaged or anything. But right before the police were about to move the body, lucky for them, I saw a note on his back that read, "Touch me and die." Turns out, if you looked closely at the kid, he attached himself to all of these wires to electrocute himself. But he didn't want the police to get electrocuted when they moved him. And then the police found right next to him the perfect manual of suicide flipped open. It told him exactly how to kill himself using electricity without damaging the body, because apparently a lot of Japanese consider hurting your own body as a sign of disrespect.
So it's okay to kill yourself as long as you leave a good-looking corpse.
I mean, I guess. I remember one of the cops saying to me that at least this one was considered enough to leave a note. Writing up the story on that was really hard, though. Even harder than seeing the dead kid. Because if I wrote it wrong, I could end up advertising the book and encouraging more suicides.
I do that a lot, too. A lot of my audience wants to kill themselves sitting through these shows.
Actually, suicide is really common in Japan. I had to report it all the time.
Could you give us another example?
There's this one thing I had to cover. I was walking in the street and a bunch of kids were just standing there and watching all perplexed. I knew I was there to cover something awful, because that was my job, but the kids made it seem like I was watching a parade. As I poked through the crowd, I realized they were watching a man burn to death. He was just wobbling around in circles like a chicken with his head cut off, and I was caught up too. I remember when he finally hit the ground, he started twitching. It was the worst death I had ever seen. But being a reporter, I bounced right back and asked one kid a bunch of questions. Turns out, the kid had been watching for a while. He told me the guy had poured gasoline all over himself and lit himself on fire. He apparently made a whole show out of his suicide. It was a really weird thing to hear, considering the kid only looked like 10.
If I'm ever a reporter for the Japanese police beat, I'll be wearing a funeral suit to my own funeral. Did you ever report on anything that wasn't terrible?
Well, some parts of my job were fun.
Well, could you tell us some? Because right now, I'm about to use the perfect manual of suicide.
Okay, well, for example, I had to interview this cop once. But the police don't like us reporters, even though we work with them all the time. They say we give away their cases, and I wasn't exactly on good terms with them. But I'll explain that later. So before I could interview the cop, I had to, in the words of my boss, butter up my source like a piece of toast. This cop had 2 kids, so I figured, let me try to get on good terms with the kids. I went to his house with a tub of ice cream, and the 2 kids answered the door. And they were probably around 8 and 10 years, I'd say. I'll never forget what the younger one said to me. She goes, "What are you?" And I looked at her all puzzled. She started talking to her sister, and apparently they were debating over whether or not I was human.
Happens to me all the time.
Well, it was new for me. So I asked the younger one why I can't be human. She said it was because I had pointed ears and a nose so big that it was impossible for me to be human. Then she and her sister went back to debating. That's not even the funniest part. Eventually, they decided I was a tengu, which, essentially, is a Japanese goblin. The youngest one asked to touch my nose, and before I could reply, shoved both her fingers up my nose and pulled down so hard I almost fell on top of her.
Wish my girlfriend would do that to me.
Trust me, you don't. So anyway, they decided I was half human, half tengu. And I had just played along because, let's face it, there's no arguing with an 8-year-old. So that part was kind of fun. Strange, but fun.
So, let's get personal here. Before you settle down, how is your love life? I mean, what's more attractive than a dorky tough guy? Am I right, ladies?
My love life was horrible. If you're a reporter, you're in a relationship with the cops, the criminals, and sometimes your sanity. You don't have time for a real relationship. But don't get me wrong, I did try.
How so?
Well, for example, I was dating this girl I was pretty serious with, and for the first time in like 3 weeks, I had a day off. So naturally, my lady and I were catching up on our long-missed, intimate time. When my boss called. He said there was probably a murder, and I had to rush to the scene ASAP. Now, my girlfriend was not happy with this, especially since I had just stripped off into my boxers. But it was my job, so I had to go. So she starts screaming at me about how it's all about work all the time. Work, work, work. Meanwhile, I just put my shirt and tie back on. I mean, we had been going through a rough patch anyway because work was so time-consuming, and usually, when I was with her, I was either too tired, too drunk, or too hungover to be of any excitement to her. And, the lady needed some excitement. So finally, she gave me the threat that if I walked out the door that night, then I walked out of the relationship too. But I did walk out because work is work, and my work was particularly vigorous.
But not your girlfriend's kind of vigorous, obviously.
No, definitely not.
Alright, so we're running out of time, and I'm really looking forward to Juan's head smashing. Oh, brick smashing. I'm sorry, but I've got one more question. Earlier, you said the cops didn't like you or something like that. What kind of havoc did you wreak that put you on their naughty list?
Yeah, this is actually a funny story. See, what I was doing was I was reporting on something, and I forget exactly what that was, and I needed to get into a private gym. So the cops, who were already there, didn't want to be bothered by me, because I was just a reporter. So me, being the gutsy bastard that I am, dressed up as a Japanese man and snuck in. But it turns out a Jewish American boy dressed up as an authentic Japanese man looks similar to a Muslim terrorist to the Japanese. So, without my knowing it, they put the whole gym under lockdown. So the police disappeared, and I'm wondering where they all went, because I needed to get to some of them. Meanwhile, I have, the Japanese SWAT team looking for me, and I had no idea. And it was very hard to get information out of people when they all just suddenly disappeared, so I decided I'd just give up and leave. And as I'm walking out, I basically get jumped by a bunch of cops and threatened. So I had to reveal myself, and they did not like that little stunt I pulled because I completely wasted the cops' time when they had an important case to look into.
Guess you never got the interview, huh?
No, but my boss sure as hell was questioning me. The only problem was it was my sanity.
All right, well, thank you, Jake. Okay, stay right there, people, because we will have Juan Big Bruce demonstrate what he does for us right after the break.